Today, I'm joined once again by John Hearne, an instructor, researcher, and lifelong public safety professional whose work challenges how we think about training, readiness, and human performance.
Was it Pat Rogers famously said, learning only occurs after demoralizing failure, right? Well, most folks can only take so much demoralizing failure. So the secret is to be working at the appropriate intensity and remembering that what's going on in your life is going to change that. So for instance, let's talk drive practice. Let's say I'm really on track and I do 2 months of solid drive practice. Well, at the end of that 2 months, everything's going to smooth out really good. I'm going to take in some tenths or quarters off my drive stroke. And let's say life happens and I have to lay off drive practice for 3 weeks. Well, it's completely unreasonable to expect to be able to start right back where you were.
If you caught our first conversation, you know that John brings real-world depth and data-backed clarity to everything that he does.
And one of the things that we hear all the time is you want to do a lot of work, but there definitely seem to be limits to that. And what's more important is to spread that practice out over the longest period of time possible. So we have to accept the fact that there are hard limits to what people can absorb.
In this follow-up, we go even deeper, talking about emotional control, the realities of violence, and what it really takes to train effectively. And you're probably going to want to take notes on this one. If you're new or watching this as a replay, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. Please subscribe on YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, Apple iTunes, and anywhere else that you can see me or hear my voice. If you don't want to miss another episode of Defenders Live, you can join our free community at defenders-live.com and become a free subscriber. Lastly, if you're looking for exceptional firearms or self-defense training, go to defenders-usa.com and look at their calendar to see what training is coming to you this year. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Defenders Live. I am your host, Lora Thorson. John Hearne is a retired U.S. Park Ranger, a law enforcement instructor, and the founder of Two Pillars Training. He brings more than 3 decades of real-world public safety experience, starting as a volunteer firefighter and EMT in the 1980s, then serving in roles from court liaison to agency firearms instructor. With over 2,000 hours of training under his belt, John has taught across the country, worked alongside legendary names like Tom Gibbons, and authored pieces in American Cop, Police One, and Recoil Off-Grid. His training combines 2 core principles: peer-reviewed science and real-world best practices. That's what drives everything he teaches today. Really looking forward to this second interview with John Hearne. Let's welcome John onto the show. Hey, John.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. Welcome back.
Thanks for making the mistake of having me again. Very few people make that mistake.
Oh, I miss your humor, and I thought I would bring you back. You are one of my favorite guests because you always can make me laugh, and I appreciate that. We're talking about some serious stuff, but you can find the humor in everything, so I appreciate that about you.
So you're saying you like me more than Dan Brady?
Depends on the day, but it's close. It's close. So let's see. Let's start since the last time that we were together, which was, 8 months ago, I think. Time flies. I'm just wondering, is there anything, because you're a researcher, you're a reader, you're always learning new stuff. Is there anything new that you've learned or anything you've changed your mind about since then?
I don't know if I've changed my mind, but just the amount of, of kind of confirming studies, data, information just kind of keeps piling up. So I was at the Rangemaster Tactical Conference this year in lovely Dallas, Texas, and Lee Weems, Eric Gelhaus, and I always have a block we do on called Rangemaster Chess Club's Favorite Studies, where we each take a research-based study and say, hey, how does this apply to the training world? So one of the things that I wanted to do was to go back and look at some of the classics from the motor science field. And one of the more interesting papers I found was a very old study, and bear with me, I'm going somewhere, about what they were looking at was frequency of practice, the intervals there. And it goes back to, I think, the 70s when the British were starting to put what we would think of as a zip code on mail. And what they ended up having to do was teach all these old men who have never typed to type. And it was a great natural experiment. They were able to vary, the frequency of the practice, even down to the number of hours. And one of the things that we hear all the time is you want to do a lot of work, but there definitely seem to be limits to that. And what's more important is to spread that practice out over the longest period of time possible. So they basically had 4 groups. I think you had the choice of it was either 1 hour once a week, 1 hour twice a week, 2 hours once a week or 2 hours 2 times a week, and you would stop it up to 80 hours. But the guys that got the least amount of training only got about 60 hours. And what was interesting was when they looked at how well these people had learned, the most effective learning had taken place with the guys that had only done an hour of training once a week, which goes kind of contrary to what we've been told a lot. But we have to accept the fact that there are hard limits to what people can absorb, right? And the other thing that I thought was interesting about that one is they also asked the students, for lack of a better word, their subjective impressions of the training. And of the people that were happiest with their training, it was the guys that got it done real fast at 2 hours twice a week, but they were the worst students, worst performers, looking at immediately and 9 months down the road. So it just goes to show you that just because somebody as an instructor makes you really, really happy, they may not have actually given you what you need. So, properly spacing out practice. One of the things that I've come to rely on more and more is what we're going to call the magic of a sleep cycle, in that your brain actually encodes a lot of this information while you're asleep. So number one, quality of sleep matters, but actually giving your brain a break between the training sessions seems to be very, very important. The example I use of that, like if I'm going to dry practice an hour a week, number one, nobody can really practice well and concentrate properly for a straight up hour. You'd be much better to practice, twice for 30 minutes, 3 times for 20 minutes, 4 times for 15. The more you can spread that out, the better off you're actually going to be as far as learning the material goes. So not necessarily something new, but it's actually like a classic. I liken it to taking shooting advice from somebody who's never heard of Jeff Cooper. Anybody that really understands the knowledge and the history and the tradition of this art would understand some of the old masters, for lack of a better word. So I enjoyed going back and tracking that study down and trying to share it with folks.
That's really cool. I'm glad that you brought that up because I think that can apply to a lot of different things. I'm thinking of times in my week where I'm practicing different things, new things that I'm learning. And you're right. I cannot focus on something for a long period of time. And it makes me think of, I can't remember if it was what book it was in talking about deep practice. But I think they were talking about Olympic athletes whenever I remember the reference. So it's really the difference between having sharp mental focus and feeling everything that's going on for me, like in dry practice or in any other kind of like a gym, whatever it is, when there's technical skill involved versus just going through the motion and getting through it and getting done and like letting the clock tick by when really there's not a connection involved, if that makes sense. Is that kind of probably? So
there's a fascinating book. I can tell you the author. I'm trying to look up the book real fast, but everybody's heard about, a lot of people have heard about the 10,000 hour rule. Yeah. And the 10,000 hour rule was based on research by a PhD by Anders Ericsson, and it was popularized by, I'm drawing a blank on who popularized it, but Anders Ericsson didn't appreciate the way his research was used and thought it had been misrepresented. So he ended up writing his own book, and he talks about the art of deliberate practice as far as that stuff goes, right? And here it is. The book is called Peak: Secrets from the New Science of Expertise. Okay. And he talks about deliberate practice, and it has the 3 F's, right? Which are focus, feedback, and fix. And the whole idea is that when you're practicing, it needs to be the sole activity you're doing. The joke only halving that I used to say is like, it used to be that I just thought I needed to get my reps on my draw stroke. So I'd put on my Taylor Swift, jam out, and get all the reps that I needed as far as that stuff goes. But the problem is, even when you have something very, very low level of interference going on, like, jamming out the Taylor Swift and stuff like that, long term, that interferes with that encoding process. And you're not telling your brain that this is absolutely important. So there's a lot of good research out there. That's the focus aspect of it. The feedback is the next step. That is, you have to have ways to track your progression as far as that goes. And then finally, you have to fix. You have to go, hey, based on the feedback that I have, how do I change what I'm doing to fix the problems that I found? And one of the key takeaways that I try to share with folks with that is this whole concept of appropriate intensity. And the human being is very sensitive to being bored or being overwhelmed. So he says that you want to be looking at about an 80 to 90% success rate in whatever you're practicing. If you're hitting it 100% of the time, it's just too easy, and you're going to lose focus. It's not going to be fun. On the other hand, if you're failing half the time, that's just kind of depressing, mind-crushing failure. Was it Pat Rogers famously said, learning only occurs after demoralizing failure, right? Well, most folks can only take so much demoralizing failure. So the secret is to be working at the appropriate intensity and remembering that what's going on in your life is going to change that. So for instance, let's talk dry practice. Let's say I'm really, really on track, and I do 2 months of solid drive practice. Well, at the end of that 2 months, everything's going to smooth out really good. I'm going to take in some tenths or quarters off my drive stroke. And let's say life happens and I have to lay off drive practice for 3 weeks. Well, it's completely unreasonable to start right back, to expect to be able to start right back where you were. So what you have to learn to do is to crank the dial back down to not as fast as you were once doing it, but to that point where you're succeeding enough to stay interested and failing often enough to stay interested as well. So it's, there is a very good bit of science out there as far as what that intensity looks like, what that success rate looks like, that sort of thing.
That's a really good point. And when you were talking about focus, feedback, and fix, you said you have to be able to fix it. But isn't it important that you need to fix it in the moment of practice? Not like you think about how you could fix it next time you practice, right? That's part of the feedback loop.
Well, ideally, it would be contemporaneous as far as that stuff goes. But, realistically, so certain things are going to be fixable immediately. For instance, Bill Rogers makes an argument that the immediate feedback of a bullet hitting a steel target is an immediate form of feedback. The other hand, though, is a lot of times we're doing this with ourselves. If you're having to videotape your drive practice and then, let's say I rep out 5 times, I go back, I look at the camera. Oh, okay, my support hand is traveling way too far back when I'm clearing a garment. That's one of those things you're not going to be able to fix it immediately. Right. But the next 5 reps, you want to make sure that you're only moving the hand as far as you need to clear the garment. So obviously, the closer the correction is to the area, that's basically discipline as far as that stuff goes. We want it to be as contemporaneous as possible, but instantaneous feedback is not always going to be possible either.
That makes sense. Well, that's a little like trail I didn't expect us to go down. That's really fun, actually.
You asked a nerd if he had found out any cool things. So,
What do I expect, right? I bet the whole conversation could be that. Because I'm sure
the other thing I'm going to throw out there is I recently got to attend Dustin Solomon's 2-day class that he ran. And for those that don't know Dustin Solomon, he makes me look so normal and well-adjusted when it comes to the nerd level on this kind of stuff. He's done a very deep dive into the neuroscience of this stuff, funded the development of training devices out of his own pocket. And his whole goal is to share with you how the human mind actually learns and how to optimize our training to do that. And again, the magic of the sleep cycle, just appreciating that there's only so much that you can absorb and change in a day. This is a long-term process as far as developing the skills that we really want to be able to have available at a minute's notice.
Oh, I know the other question I was going to ask you. Have you started your book yet that we talked about last time?
Well, I have not started the book yet. I am doing a lot more writing for the articles as far as stuff like that goes. Yeah. My mentor, Tom Givens, has nothing good to say about publishing books as far as most books seem to be vanity projects at this point because they don't ever sell enough to actually make you any money, but you get to brag that you've written a book. And at this point in my life, I'm interested in writing for as many people who will pay me this month for something.
Makes sense. Yes. Cool. I just thought I would bring that up because I think that was towards the end of our last conversation. I thought, I really think he should do that. So I was curious if you
were strongly encouraging it. And I know that you would be one of the 100 people that bought the book.
Yeah. And I would help you design the cover too. So yeah, that's secretly what I want to do, John. Where should we go?
Improve my sense of aesthetic. That's all I'll say.
I think I want to bring up the new target that you were telling me about because that's something new as well. But we'll just get all the new stuff out of the way. You said you're going to bring back the TACman target, and I didn't even know what you were talking about. So could you describe what that is and what your plan is for that?
So if you've been in the training industry for any amount of time, really since probably the mid-90s, there was a target out there. And it was called the TACman. It's basically, I've got one here for the people that can see this. It's basically a thin plastic shell that looks exactly like a person. It's got about 7 inches of depth as far as stuff like this goes. It's got a lot of detail, and you can mount it different ways. There's a tab that's normally at the top and some tabs on the side. So it'll go in a normal target stand. It works with turning targets, that sort of a thing. And I had just been buying and using them for my training forever. And then I couldn't get any more. And I contacted the guy that was actually making them. He was actually out of Canada, and he didn't want to make. I'm like, dude, I'm willing to pay you to make another run for me. And he basically, because of post-COVID inflation and dealing with, I guess, Canadian business concerns, he simply could not justify making a run. And finally, I'm like, hey, would you sell me the molds? And there may have been a 2-year negotiation on the price of those molds as far as that stuff goes. But in January of this year, to try to beat the pre-Trump tariffs, I actually hauled myself up to Buffalo, New York, left all of my stuff that would get me put in prison immediately in Canada, left that in my hotel room secured up properly, ran up to Toronto, bought the molds and brought them back home. I dropped the molds off at a company up in Ohio. I paid them what to me is a very significant 50% deposit to make the initial run to bring these back. So I'm hoping to actually have targets in hand, hopefully by the end of the month, maybe beginning of July. One of the things that's great about these targets is basically the price point they're going to hit. COVID issues, inflation, I think retail is going to be running closer to $75 a piece. But part of that is there's nothing any less expensive. There's some other stuff that's available. It's about $150. But as you can probably, I'll throw this up here again. It's a very durable material. I can't tell you how many bullets have been through this, right? So the shell itself, as a business thing, it kills me because it lasts forever, right? If you throw a T-shirt over the front, you can't tell it's been shot. You score the back. So I needed them for me, but I'm also hoping that other people will be interested in these. I'll probably write a couple of articles. I've got a way to basically make a very anatomically correct 3D target that gives you the full depth that you need. I use that as a common part of my training with two pillars. And we've also seen a resurgence in the whole concept of teaching tactical anatomy. So I'm hoping that this will be a part of it as far as that goes.
That's cool. So you're foreseeing these to be available potentially on your website soon. Is that correct?
So no, I have zero desire to sell these from my house and garage as far as that stuff goes. Okay. I've been negotiating with different vendors, like Action Target has already agreed to be a distributor as far as that stuff goes. Okay. I'm looking at a couple of other people. So I would basically be a wholesaler. I would sell it to other people who would market it as far as that goes. I have a very strong desire to shoot the targets when I need them and pretty much let somebody else, do the wholesale distribution so that I'm not, boxing up targets and sending them out every day.
Yeah, that makes sense. That would be you need a large space for the inventory of those.
That is part of the issue as well. Yeah. Yeah,
for sure. Well, good. That sounds kind of cool. Let's see, which direction should we go next? Do you have anything else on your mind that you wanted to, like last time when we talked, I think one of the comments that I made was, man, this could have gone twice as long as it did. And, I've slept since then. I don't remember every single thing that we talked about, but I do remember it being feeling like skimming the surface, at the time. And I'm just wondering if there was anything in particular we could go a little bit deeper on. I'm running through my list here, but I'm just throwing it out to you if you have anything in mind as well.
We did have a fairly broad-ranging discussion as far as that goes. I'm trying to think if there's anything.
This is a good question.
We'll send it. We'll see what happens.
Well, yeah, I'm just curious about this. So it's just a really interesting question, kind of just random and out of left field, but it says, if you had a clean slate to redesign firearms training from the ground up, what 3 things would you mandate from day one? I think that's a really interesting question.
Well, that is a good question. But let me say some ands and ums to try to sort through that.
Take all the time you need. We can edit out all of the quiet spots.
Sure, yeah. You obviously haven't seen my video editing. That's the other thing that I'm working on is a YouTube channel. I've had to teach myself to edit video, and it's been a horrible nightmare as far as that goes.
I have some hacks I could share with you after the interview.
So one of the things, I'm not going to say I'm sure I'm going to have 3. I'm just going to riff here for a second.
Sure.
I think that one of the biggest problems with firearms training is that we don't begin with the end in mind. There is a fundamental difference between teaching my soon-to-be 9-year-old son to be able to be a good marksmanship, be able to hit with his .22 bolt action rifle. Okay, that's teaching him how to use a tool, some of the basic body control as far as that stuff goes. As far as the firearms training that interests me is the high stakes stuff, and that is we are training people to shoot people, right? We shoot people to engender a behavior change in a nutshell. And if the situation is so dire that you can use deadly force to engender a behavior change, things are really bad, which means that the bullets need to go where they need to go, when they need to go there. I think that we pay lip service to Rule 4 and concerns about things that are downrange. I've looked at some research out there. It's going to be very hard for people under extreme duress to withhold fire when there are friendlies or potential friendlies downrange. That tells me that people are going to shoot almost regardless of what the background looks like, which means that their ability to hit 100% of the time with every one of those bullets is crucial. And it's not just hit somewhere on the dude. One of the discussions we have occasionally is, will bullets over penetrate? And if you are using premium self-defense ammo and you shoot somebody, in the good parts up here high in the torso where the body's thick, the odds of that bullet exiting with any amount of energy to harm another human being are very, very minimal. However, if in the process of trying to hit dude, you put one bullet through his arm here and it misses, say, the humerus, the bone in the arm, and it goes sailing through, even though you technically hit the guy, right, that bullet is still a downrange risk. I just looked at a review of officer-involved traffic stop where the bad guy shot not just one, but two cops in that shooting. And he did it with the same bullet, where basically one of the bullets passed through an extremity of the first officer, struck the second officer. So if we're intending to use these skills under the situations we're describing, there has to be 100% accountability for the shots that we fire. There really is, I would say, really is almost no acceptable miss rate when it comes to this. Now, we realize that under the duress of the event, there's obviously not going to be 100% hits as a general rule, but we can certainly move from a 50% hit rate, 80% hit rate. You look at the database of range master student shootings, I think we're better than 90% on actually getting hits in the field and not jeopardizing others in that process. So one of the big things I would offer if I was redesigning training, and again, we're talking about self-defense training, is beginning with the end in mind, that learning how to mechanically operate the gun and place bullets where they need to go to does nothing to get us toward the desired end state, which is to be able to problem solve with the gun. I'm going to slaughter the quote, but Scotty Reed says something to the effect that gunfighting is problem solving with a pistol under extreme duress. And rather than just being happy that, hey, I finally broke my 2-second bill drill, number one, maybe asking if, in what percent of circumstances is the bill drill an appropriate response, but also asking ourselves, are there any skills that might be more important than a sub 2-second bill drill when we start to prioritize our work? So
I love that.
I was the beginning with the end in mind. Something else that drives me crazy is I believe that safe movement with the gun is not some advanced ninja skill. And that because people don't know how to teach it well and perceive it as a high reliability exercise, they simply forgo it and say, hey, we'll teach you that later, or not teach it at all. Right. You can look at there's some pretty good research out there. Claude Warner, when you look at his analysis of the armed citizen shooting from the NRA, we may not be doing a classic hostage shot, right? Not to say those don't ever happen, but a lot of these events take place around the home where people aren't carrying a gun. They have to retrieve a gun and then go to the problem, which means that you are moving fast, children, family, pets, wives, loved ones, as far as that stuff goes. So the other thing that I would start almost on day one is the level of awareness of where your muzzle is and where your trigger finger is that would allow you to move safely in harrowing circumstances as part of that initial training, as opposed to reserving it for something later. So
yeah, because you might not see those people later, Yeah.
Or that's like, one of the things I've always said is if you want people to do it in the real world, you have to let them do it in training. Yeah. You never want the first time they do it to be for all the marbles. So, it goes back to the concept of novelty. But, if you've moved around people safely with a gun, even in a very controlled environment, at least your mind has checked that box and goes, yeah, we know how to do this. A lot of times when people break down under stress, it's because the situation confronting them is one they've never seen, one they've never planned for, and they're frantically flipping through that mental Rolodex. Excuse me while I date myself. I'm not sure what the 21st century equivalent is of a mental Rolodex. Maybe you're flipping through your notes in your iPhone. One of these notes somewhere has something to do with the problem here, right? And while that's happening, time is a wasting, and time is the most precious commodity we have in those kind of events. Yeah, those are all really good points because I've been on the range many times and I understand why the rules exist. I totally get that. But I feel like some people get so hard and fast on the rules that there's never an opportunity to look at the situation in any other way than the target is here and I can't break the 180 and end of story. But that's not real life. That's not the 360-degree environment that we live in every day, where things are moving around and it's dynamic and we have to think about it and move. And so one of my questions, kind of segueing off of that, is, I know John Hearne does a lot of drills with different types of, help me with the words. You're so good with words, John. Another stimulus. Right? Yeah. Yeah, a visual stimulus versus an auditory stimulus. That in and of itself is enough to throw people quite a bit. And I just, when I took his class, I just thought to myself, wow, this is crazy that I have been in training, I don't know, at that point, probably, 8 years or something. And that was never anything that anyone had introduced to me ever before. Yet it was more real to real life self-defense than an auditory beep. And so my question then is you're talking about introducing movement earlier on and making things a little bit more real world. How early would you recommend introducing, and I guess it depends is the answer. I already know the answer. The answer is it depends. But introduce this real problem solving, like teaching people how to think with a gun. You know what I mean? Like,
I think once the fundamentals and the basics are there, that's the time then for them to start thinking things through and having problems to solve. Would you agree, or
I think absolutely need to do it as early as possible. Let me give you somebody else's answer, then I'll give you mine. I mentioned Dustin Solomon. Yeah. One of the things that Dustin has been assigned to do and has been working on for a number of years is he has completely rewritten the entire curriculum for basically, they call it DJS, I think, but basically post for New York State. And he introduces a visual element to the shoot decision from day one. They will not fire a shot without a visual indicator to engage the target.
Really?
So, he's doing it very early. The other thing that I would point out is, we get our hands on the guns with live bullets in it too soon. And again, this tends to dovetail nicely with Solomon's work. There's a lot to be said for smaller increments of information, basically having people load, unload with dummy rounds, that sort of thing. And in that environment is a good point in time to at least start teaching and thinking about muzzle and trigger is part of that process. But you're doing it, number one, you're doing it early. So primacy is going to be a factor. Mm-hmm. But you're also doing it often enough that it's probably going to matter. And because it's been introduced early and often, it's probably going to have a higher likelihood of sticking with a person.
It's so funny how some things that seem so common sense, like, aren't common. I don't know.
This is the problem. And I'm not, so first off, Hoshin is absolute top drawer. You can't do much better than John Hoshin for an instructor. Let me say that. I think it's important that people recognize their peers and recognize their betters. And Hoshin is my better as far as that stuff goes. But we're not the only ones. Hoshin, just as a shameless plug, Hoshin, myself, Lee Weems, Eric Gelhaus, we have an event called the Cognitive Conclave that we're running again later this year. Mm-hmm. And the whole premise of the Cognitive Conclave is that most firearms instructors, in the name of making a safe range, have completely stripped from you all the relevant decisions you would have to make to use this tool effectively in the real world. To steal a Will Pettyism, we don't need safe ranges. We need safe shooters. Yeah. You can take a safe shooter and put them in any environment, and they're going to be safe. If your only mechanism for ensuring safety is to arrange the range in such a way that nobody can really screw up and hurt anybody else, you've done a great disservice to the students. I think this comes very much from an institutional environment where our goal is to get everybody cranked through here. Mm-hmm. And if everybody can shoot 70% or better on this ridiculous sobriety test of a course, we have done our job. So their incentive for really making sure these people are squared away and are safe shooters is basically zero. They're just there to crank them through the machine that is, institutional training. Mm-hmm. And, they hand them off to somebody else, and that's not their problem anymore. So we really do need to think about how do we restore the important decisions to our shooters. One of the more common mistakes we see in the real world are Rule 4 concerns. Mm-hmm. Part of the reason I think we see so many Rule 4 concerns is multifaceted, but the big one is we never make you worry about Rule 4 on the range unless you've done something with Hoshin or something with me. Yeah. It's just a given. You shoot the target. We tell you which target you're going to shoot. It's the one directly in front of you. And if it was a really nice range, it even has a little number. The only thing that matters is this little 3-foot lane in front of target number 11. That's all that matters. That's all you have to focus on. That's all you have to worry about. You don't have to worry about anything outside in your peripheral behind you or anything like that. And again, that's a great disservice to the students if you expect them to use these skills in the real world versus you just need to check some boxes and move along.
Right. Yeah, I totally get that. So I have more of, I guess, a personal question that this brought up for me. And that is, I was taking a class at a Girl and a Gun national conference, and I struggled a lot with this. We were supposed to be learning how to solve problems, chaotic problems, with a pistol. And I had taken Holshin's class. I'd done well in that. And I'd take a lot of Adam Winch's stuff. And I believe that he does teach people how to think with a gun. And so I felt decently prepared for it. But what I was hung up on, and I'm just curious as to maybe if you think there's something I could have looked at it differently or done differently, or what the conditions maybe could have been changed. But what he was trying to do was he was trying to make us solve problems based on what indicators were on the target. So it was a visual indicator, which is good. And sorting through the innocence versus the shoot targets, good. I like that. And I could make those distinctions quickly, and I could get shots on target quickly and effectively where they should be. The problem was that in my mind, I couldn't get over the notion, or the fact, I guess, not even the notion, that I couldn't get over the fact that subconsciously I knew this wasn't real life, because the targets were, they were just plain Jane cardboard brown targets, right? silhouette targets. And part of me wants to say, well, the reason I flagged Grandma Good Cookies going from target 1 to target 3, the 2 targets that I knew that, I should be shooting and she was in between, is because I knew that they were targets and they weren't real people. I don't know if that's actually true or not. Like if in real life, I'd be like, yeah, that's a person. I'm not going to point my gun at a person. But I went through that iteration, not the exact one, but different ones, probably 3 different times before I could cognitively stop myself and, shoot whatever target and then go over the head or go down, around the feet and over to the next target. And they were quite a bit like distance-wise away from us too, which also I think played into it for me, because I think if they would have been closer, there would have been some sort of a sense of, it would like been more easy for me to, don't point your gun there or something. I don't know. It was, there was no real consequence, obviously, because it was training, and I get the point of what was trying to be taught. And I would literally stand there with my back to the targets and get ready to turn around and solve the problem. And I would think right before I turned around, okay, this time, Lora, you're not going to flag the no-shoots. No matter what, you're not going to flag the no-shoots. And I still would.
The Morgan Freeman voice says she, in fact, flagged the targets.
And it's probably because of the way I said that to myself now that I'm thinking about it, because I started focusing on it. Like I said, don't do it. And that's the very reason I did it, maybe. So I'm sure there's a lot of things you could maybe draw from this, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
So I have a bunch of different thoughts. Some are mine, some are other people's. So number one, you've probably spent most of your shooting career not caring about whether you muzzle targets, right? It has not been something that's, when you think about your shot process, it's like present the gun comes to the visual line of fire, pick up my dot, pick up my sight, stick, start it heading toward where it needs to be, touch the trigger, get the slack out. As soon as the dot or the front sight arrives where it needs to be, finish the press, the gun's going to lift and recoil, immediately, bring it back down, reset the trigger. That's part of the mental model that you've built for breaking your shot. One of the things that was not as part of that model is, we say Grandma Good Cookies as far as that stuff goes, right? Whether she's there or not. So just the fact that you haven't had to do it a lot, is not part of that process, is hurting you as well. Other random thoughts is that I run a very similar drill in some of my stuff, and I call it the fur ball drill. And what I've noticed after running that drill for about 3 years now is I know it's a good drill and exercise, because all of the mistakes that we see made in real world shootings are going to happen right there, from misidentifying threats. The one that I see that goes, so number one, muzzle control just goes out the window, right? Just straight out the window. It's something that's very, very hard to do. I see what I call it a major degradation, what I'll call quality of fire. So we've literally spent the last day and 3 quarters talking about shooting people in the high center chest as far as that stuff goes. And even though I'm just using, basically plain USPSA targets, almost inevitably everybody shoots the center of the target, because that is, for lack of a better word, their natural instincts. So I think part of the problem you're having is that you're not going to get this right the first, the second, the third time through the exercise. Now, if you were to run that exercise 25 times, and part of the problem is we just don't have the time to do that generally, you would probably start to see a lot of that, a lot of those concerns start to clear up. You'll be able to think more, hey, I don't just need to shoot the center of this thing. I need to shoot, high where the important plumbing is as far as that goes. A big part of your mind just has now seen the problem. It has started to develop some kind of a frame of reference for what it's going to need. I'm pretty sure we talked last time about mental maps, that mental maps are the most predictive aspect of high levels of performance. And you actually see that echoed in the Anders Ericsson book that I mentioned earlier. He talks about mental maps. So what's going to happen is, as you do this over time, you're going to start to change the mental maps that you've had before for what you have to do to start to match the problem at hand. And again, I think it's a disservice that the training industry is doing, is it will sit there and tell you that, hey, if you can run your sub 2-second build drill, as far as this stuff goes, that's good enough. Not as not worrying about where the muzzle's going. And I'm sure somebody's thinking of it, and I have to give the other alternative version. I recently did a series of classes with Chuck Pressburg, and the class, when he teaches it to cops, is called Hostage Rescue Hostage Rescue Handgun, right? And one of the realities about tense, rapidly evolving, chaotic circumstances is that good people may be inadvertently muzzled. Okay. So avertant, I guess, I guess the opposite of inadvertent is advertent. We don't want to do advertent muzzling on people, but I think that we have to appreciate the fact that inadvertent muzzling is probably going to happen, which is why, again, that movement on and off the trigger becomes so important, because that is the final fail-safe. And it could very well be, hey, you have every intention of, not muzzling Grandma Good Cookies, but then, Glenda Goodwell comes running in front of you at the last possible minute. Yeah. And maybe you don't have time to, by the time you pick her up in your peripheral vision, you don't have time to muzzle of her. If all you can do is get your finger off the trigger and stop your shooting cycle, that's better than what 90% of the people can probably do when confronting that situation.
Yeah.
It's almost like this is not easy, and it's not about the mere mechanical operation of a piece of machinery. And there probably needs to be a little more thinking involved with the use of the tool.
Yeah, it's funny. I went straight to it's a cardboard target and I can't pretend like it's not. But was that just an excuse is what I'm wondering. And I have no way of knowing. I'm like, if this felt realistic to me, I'm sure I wouldn't do that. But then I'm like, is that actually true? And I don't know if it is or not, but that's what my mind said.
People, I want to say Claude Werner, when you take a class with Claude, he requires that you bring a life-size face photo of somebody, one of your family members. And when you suddenly, put that in front as the hostage problem, that does tend to change people's attitudes. One of the things that I'm a big fan of, and it's part of the reason I like the TACMAN targets and some of the stuff that I do, is that real people have faces, right? Yeah. And those faces don't just give you that contextual grounding, but they also are important information as far as like where I would want to place a particular bullet based on things such as ears. Ears are really good landmarks when you're looking at somebody kind of front on, if you can't see their eyes, that sort of a thing. So again, I think, the more contextually relevant clues you can give, the better off you're going to be. But now, so you've invited me to nerd out for a second. So, you asked for this. Remember this. You asked for me. Okay. Listeners, I'm sorry. This is all her fault. This brings us into the realm of another consideration in the training world. And there's this thing called simulator fidelity. Some of the people out there that are trying to improve training will say, hey, we need to increase the fidelity of the training. And inevitably that means video simulators with lots of visual information as far as that goes. There's some really good research out there because they use simulators a lot in the medical community. And what they know from that research is that having the absolute highest levels of simulator fidelity, that is the problem that you're practicing on, looks exactly like the real world problem. At a certain point, you reach diminishing returns. That sometimes the simulation can be so realistic that it's distracting. And while students report wanting more simulator fidelity, a lot of times learning occurs at the lower levels. So I get, I just use, USPSA targets as for my stuff as far as that goes, because I've found that gives me enough simulator fidelity for the problem I'm trying to create. Now, so I do the exact same thing with 3D targets and faces and those considerations. Yeah, I guess I could, but at a certain point, we're getting most of the lesson that we need out of this. And maybe it is more of a mental shift as far as getting the maximum value out of it. Yeah. I think the big thing is that you're actually thinking about it.
Yeah, it just made me, I was very frustrated. I was downright mad when I got done. So, because, I'm taking my training seriously and thinking, oh my gosh, if you were to ask me in real life, would I do that? I would say absolutely not. There is no way I would do that, right? And then this just proved that 3 times. It took me on the 3rd try halfway through, I was able to stop myself, whoop, don't do that. And then from then on, it clicked and I got it. But it took that many reps for me to get it. And I was really disappointed in myself that I didn't either get it on the first or the first time I did it wrong. I wasn't mad at all. I was like, oh, that's interesting information and I'll correct it the next time. And then I didn't, even though I intended to, which really got me confused. So anyway, I guess there was an emotional attachment to the learning lesson of it that I took very seriously, which is this is not okay and I must fix this. And so that is why I think I brought it up with you, because I was wondering, what is this about and how can I explore this in a way that I can really work to simulate this in the future and fix this in my mental mapping. So I appreciate your feedback on that.
People tend to downplay the complexity and also how much the simulator stuff does matter. A lot of people will say, hey, it's just a range exercise, but they'll develop a lot of attachment to what's going on. Skip Gokenhauer, who used to be the director of the NTI, shared a story about talking with some guy that talked about how ridiculous this whole thing was, that we're in these force-on-force masks. And there's no way anybody would think this crap is real. And, 5 minutes later, he's like literally crawling the walls kind of thing. And he's freaked out because somebody, just tried to kill him. And, the mind really doesn't, I was like, consciously you can process this isn't real, but the subconscious doesn't know that gun that's pointed at you really can't hurt you as far as that stuff goes. So it sees it as a legitimate threat to its continued existence, which creates all kinds of potentially creates all kinds of chemical cocktails.
Totally agree with you. I experienced that when I went to gun sight and was in their shoot house, and one of the targets was a hostage target. And I swear to God, my son's face was on that target, even though it literally wasn't. My mind saw that. So, and that's another one of those memories I will never forget. So it's crazy what the mind
does get
can
to
do.
an interesting question because, Solomon talks about this and Hogan's done it. And a lot of people will say, hey, you're just putting these green dots and red dots on targets that they need to look like things and stuff like that. But I think there's a strong argument to be made that humans interpret the world based on symbols, right? The only reason that black piece of plastic that's shaped like a Glock has any significance is because it's a symbol of danger as far as that goes. So when your mind looked for a symbol of somebody that would have to be saved, you're just automatically thought about your son, right? And just put his face in there because I would offer that symbolically, that's the thing that would be most likely to appear to you to be important.
Yeah, totally. I think my kids were playing baseball outside and they just hit the house with the baseball. Either that or a bird just flew in and he didn't make it. I'm not sure.
It sounds like a proper upbringing to me.
I'm not sure what's going on out there, but anyway, let's switch gears here just a little bit. I want to dig into this just a little bit more. I am just fascinated by human behavior, mine included, but also other people's. And I'm fascinated by training and the way that our mind works. And especially we did just touch on the emotional aspect of it, which I would argue that tough gun guys don't really want to talk about, but it's a really important thing to understand and be in control of under high stress situations, I would argue. And we kind of started to talk about that in the last interview. And you said in the last interview that skill supports emotional control. So I would like you to flesh that out a little bit more, but is there anything else besides that we can be doing to train for that kind of pressure and that kind of emotional resiliency that we're going to need in those high stress situations?
So that's a good question. And I'm trying to stall to pull up. I think I've got there's stuff that I have for my presentations that I try to keep handy, right?
Okay.
So skills are easy. Skills are quantifiable. And quite frankly, if you have any kinesthetic intelligence at all, right, it's not that hard to develop the skill, right? The problem is you're going to have emotional control to be able to access that skill and bring it to the fight. And we generally take it as a given that your performance in real life is going to be less than it is in the square range. People will argue, how much skill do you lose? Larry Vickers, I just listened to an interview where he says the best you can hope for is to deliver 50% of your square range performance. I don't think the number is that dire. I think it's going to depend on you and the situation you're facing. But that skill that you're trying, how much of the skill you can bring into the fight is going to be very much a result of your emotional control. And if motor skills are very easy to develop, emotional control is almost the complete opposite. It's far more nebulous and far more difficult to develop. So rather than like one checklist, like, hey, learn to draw the gun and shoot really fast, we have to do a whole bunch of different activities. We call it a holistic approach to this thing. So when we're looking at the emotional control, this may sound all woo-woo, and I'm not trying to sound all woo-woo as far as that stuff goes, but there's really good science behind it. So let's talk with something we've already mentioned, sleep. Getting solid sleep is huge. Your brain is, for very crudely, kind of like a chemical engine, and it's pretty much running on cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and dopamine, which is kind of like a happy drug as far as that stuff goes, right? So one of the things that good sleep allows you to do is to kind of purge that negative cortisol out of your body. So you look like cops that are running from hot call to hot call to hot call. They're going to have a greater preponderance of cortisol running around in their brains, which is going to make that emotional control just more difficult. When you combine that with like shift work and having to work overtime for court and not getting sleep, all that, kind of combines. So I call it like the good dad advice, the good mom advice. Let's just start out with the basics. Are you sleeping? Are you eating right? And are you exercising? Those are probably the three of the easier things to do, kind of low hanging fruit to that side of the equation. Exercise, Also has a very direct effect on the level of cortisol. Good regular exercise can kind of change your how soon that flight or fright process kicks in as far as that goes. So that's the low-hanging fruit of the emotional control. As far as everything else, I have a whole handout in the presentation, and it's, some of this stuff helps, some of it doesn't. But in a nutshell, get good initial training. Work with the tool on a regular basis, right? When I say a regular basis, I mean dry practice twice a week, ideally live fire at least once a month. Obviously more is better, but that's probably a reasonable standard for most people to work to. Dry practice 2 to 3 times a week, right? Touch the gun in some shape, form, or fashion. Try to get to the range once a month. If you're picking the right drills and exercises, you can do a lot of work with 30 or 50 rounds. Obviously 100 is better as far as that stuff goes. Part of the emotional control is making sure what the problems that you need to solve you've seen before. So shoot targets with faces, right? That's one of the things that we do a great disservice is a lot of our training targets are these amorphous shape. You've got the B-27, you've got the TranStar, you've got the FBIQ. Those are all commonly used targets for firearms training, but none of them look like a person as far as that stuff goes, right? Things to get used to. People tend to move when you shoot them. So part of your development needs to be learn how to shoot targets that move. Exposing yourself to shooting under pressure is going to be valuable. I'm not saying you have to become a USPSA Grandmaster, but attending an occasional match, especially a match that has some kind of a force-on-force component, is going to really help. Exposing yourself to novel situations that you might be afraid of, right? In a perfect world, we'd all be purple belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. That's probably not realistic for most folks. So, I hate to say anything good about Cecil Birch, but if you go spend 3 days with Cecil Birch, he'll teach you how to throw a punch, take a punch, and not be a complete liability when you get on the ground. So exposing yourself to these novel situations that could be quite harrowing, just having seen it before is huge. You're a mom, you probably get a lot of this. Just developing your ability to focus and ignore what I call noise and chaos, right? In a tense, rapidly evolving situation, there is going to be important information and unimportant information. And when we look at aerial, we can go look at aerial combat, right? The people who win fights are the people who know what information is important and what they can ignore. So learning to develop that filter to work in noise and chaos is huge. You can also do something as simply as talking or listening to somebody who has done it well in the past. Really easy access point for that. I'm sure we can probably throw it in the show notes. There's an incredible interview with Jarrett Reston. There's a short form of that interview and a long form of that talk where he talks about winning a gunfight. And he walks you through his fight, right? And what it was like to get shot in the face. And he talks about his fitness routine before that and his partner's fitness routine and what they changed afterwards. So listening to people who have done it is important. Another source for that, my friend Paul Kirchner wrote a great series of books called Deadliest Men and More Deadliest Men, just reminding yourself that this performance is possible if you do it, right? We mentioned fitness. Based on some other research like Mike Ock's work and stuff like that, I would consider balance to be just as important as strength or aerobic capacity. And it is a separate skill that probably needs to be worked. There's a lot of arguments you can make that people with poorly developed balance systems, as soon as they start to shift their visual system to the gun, will panic more because they don't have the resources just to keep literally standing up, right? Anytime you can think with the gun in your hand is going to help with that emotional control. Again, you don't have to take cognitive pistol with me. There's other classes like Will Petty's vehicle CQB, the shoot house classes, that sort of stuff. Those require you to think with the gun in your hand. Doing the visualization is huge. My friend William Maple said, don't just do this nebulous visualization. Put yourself in places you go to, right? And if your heart rate is not changing when you're visualizing, you're doing it wrong. So I'm not going to talk about visualizing an armed robbery at a dry cleaner's. I'm going to tell you about an armed robbery at my dry cleaner's. I walk in the front door. There's pretty much nothing to the right. It's just dead counter space. The only place you can go is a little counter down this way, and there's nowhere out. So when you go to check out, when you go to pick up your dry cleaning and stuff like that, you are literally in a hole, right? So if I'm going to be involved in an armed robbery in that, dry cleaners, it's going to come in from my right, and I'm not going to have any choices, right? It's either going to be comply, rely on the goodwill of the robber, or I'm going to have to realize what's going on and immediately get into the fight because I've been channelized to such a high degree, right? That's what my dry cleaners look like. When you Think about an armed robbery in a convenience store. It's not some nebulous 7-Eleven in La La Land. It's the one up the street around your corner. So, visualize your scenarios that you're likely to have to deal with. Some other stuff that may help with that is just really, really low-hanging fruit that I like to encourage people is to train your eyes and to train your hands with the shooting techniques that most of us are pushing out there. All those rely on a certain level of grip strength to really, really work well. And developing grip strength without hurting yourself has a lot of return on investment for not much expense as far as that stuff goes. Real quickly, when I say without hurting yourself, everybody wants to get those captains of crush things. That's probably not the best way to develop grip strength. If you're going to ignore me and get the captains of crush, they actually make what they call like these little bands that move contra. So like your fingers start kind of sprawled up, and you actually have to work the muscles in the opposite direction. If you do nothing but those captains of crush, you have a high probability of developing tendonitis, which will completely make your life miserable and kind of short circuit the whole learning to get better process. If you want to develop grip, there's this thing called deadlifts. You probably have some familiarity with, right? Holding onto the bar for a deadlift, or I call it my redneck, farmer's carry. I have 2 cinder blocks, and I have like chain route through them, and I've got like 2-inch PVC, so it's a fat grip, and you just do farmer's carries with those, right? That's a more realistic way to build your grip. So emotional control, there's not like, hey, do this one thing, check the box. It's much more of a lifelong pursuit. And it's going to be, there's no do this one thing and everything's great. It's a collection of complementary activities that get you where you need to be.
That's a heck of a collection, John Hearne. I was taking notes the whole time.
It was easy. I gave you the answer. Okay.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I love it though.
It's up to you to execute that.
You can download information into a podcast so fast that I almost can't even keep up. But it's because it's all really good, really relevant information. And I just get excited about hearing it every time that you're on the show. I feel like you should just be a regular.
A lecture. I don't want to claim that who wins, who loses, and why would change everybody's life, but it would definitely change your life.
Yeah.
And if you're similarly wired to Lora, it would be a really good use of a day.
Well, that's a great segue into what I was going to talk about next. Well, should I do that now? Because I had a question. Yeah, because I don't want you to go on another tangent, John. Just hold that thought. And now let me ask something. Actually, I'm not asking anything. I'm stating something, which is my son and I had a kickboxing class last night. It was the first striking / kickboxing I've ever done in my life, which, by the way, I like it. I like it a lot more than jiu-jitsu. A lot more. But one of the things they had us do was you were talking about novel experiences. One of the things they had us do at the very end was we had to do 3 rounds of 25 sit-ups, and your partner had to be on their knees above you with this big, huge pad that didn't hurt you necessarily. It stung a little. And every time you went down flat on your back to come back up for the next setup, you got whacked really hard in the stomach. And I guess the idea is it's the beginning of getting used to being hit. Have you experienced this, or you know what I'm talking about? You went silent and I can't hear.
There's the mental level and the physical aspect. So part of it is, it's ridiculous to expect to get in a fight and not get hit.
Yeah.
But the other part of that is that the very high level boxers can just take body shots like it's nothing.
I know.
There's some videos running around out there, and part of that is just beginning that hardening process.
Yeah.
Because if there was ever a core exercise, tightening to the point that the body shot is effectively stopped is definitely that core exercise.
Yeah, I'm just saying that was my very first experience of anything like that before. And I realized after the second hit, I'm not going to die. But the idea of it at first was you're going to do what, and
dare you?
Yeah. And they were hitting pretty hard, but then, after a few of them, I'm like, oh, this is no big deal. I didn't die, and I think my abs might get double good now, because there is an extra tightness that happens when you think that you're going to get hit with something. That's a new level of ab workout. I think that
proper motivation. Anything is possible with the proper motivation.
Yeah, definitely. So I wanted to bring that up because that's what came to my mind. And the other thing, you were talking about exercise, and you said that it helps. I think you said that it helps your fight or flight response. Do you mean that? What did you mean by that?
So there is. I'm trying to think how to do this. When people really, really crap out in the real world, and you see those raw panics, right? Most people are able to start in a more rational side of the brain, but if things go bad enough for long enough, they will tend to transition to the emotional side of the brain. And the emotional side of the brain really can only do flight, fright, freeze, or posture. Exercise can actually delay how long it takes your subconscious to go, yeah, we need to shift to the emotional mind. It's part of it. Yeah. And that comes straight from John Hearne's book, Spark, talking about the revolutionary impact of exercise. Quoted directly from him. But that's part of the reason that, elite military units also have pretty elite fitness standards. I mean, if you look at a tier 1 military unit, those guys are like Division I football player level of athleticism, Olympic performance, that kind of goes, because you can't separate in the mind and the body. They're interleaved. They're the same.
That makes sense. Totally makes sense.
I like to think that everything I says makes sense.
So far, most of it has. Yeah, so far. Well, good. This is all really good information. I learn something new every time I talk to you, John, and I really appreciate your time. One last thing that I wanted you to talk about before we leave, because we're over the hour, is who wins, who loses, and why is a presentation that you give. And you said that you're going to now flesh this out for me. You said you're thinking about making it into a class or portions of it into a class, a shooting class.
Who wins, who loses, and why is my lecture. That's an roughly, depending on how the class goes, an 8 to 10 hour lecture, right? Mm-hmm. What I do is I then port that, a lot of that information to the shooting class. That's kind of my flagship class, which is cognitive pistol with tactical anatomy. So what we do is there's that long list of stuff I just kind of went through. We try to do almost all of that in cognitive pistol with tactical anatomy, right? Everything but the force on force, that's an overhead that I can't deal with. So that class is structured very much to give you a chance to basically think with the gun in your hand, starting at a very, very basic level and working your way up to the point that we're doing the complex exercises as like kind of a graduation exercise, for lack of a better word, at the end of the class, which tries to integrate all those considerations all at the same time.
Cool. So for those of you that are listening and not watching, I just put up twopillarstraining.com. That's where people can learn more about you and get on your schedule, I assume. Is there anywhere you're going to be this year that people need to know about? Or
So I mentioned earlier, we've got the Cognitive Conclave that I'm doing with Holston, Gail House, and Lee Weems. Tickets are on sale for that now. Probably that Weems Guy show would be the best on Facebook, would be the best place to get those. That's the joint class we're doing. I have classes scheduled for the rest of the year. July, I'm teaching that series, the lecture and the 2-day class in New Orleans. It's July, but it is on an indoor range. So if you've ever wanted to go to New Orleans and hang out, maybe have a cool place for the spouse to hang out and go do stuff while you're in a shooting class, I'm going to be in the New Orleans area in July. I'm in Minnesota, just outside of Minneapolis, in August. November, I think I'm in Oklahoma. I've got classes in Indiana in September as well, just outside of Indianapolis. I'll throw up here. I just threw in the chat direct links to the tickets as far as that stuff goes. My website is crap. I fully acknowledge that. It does not in any way, shape, or form meet Lora standards. But right after I learn to edit video, I'm going to learn how to work in WordPress as far as that stuff goes. So, most of my stuff is available through that twopillars.corsizio.com that I just typed into the chat that you'll hopefully throw in here somewhere to get to that stuff. Or, I am over 50, so the only social media I really do is Facebook. And there is a Facebook business page that has all this information as well.
Good to know. That's awesome. And I will put that link in the show notes below so people can go there and have a direct link to tickets. That's great. Thank you, John. You're fun to have on the show.
Let me plug.
Yeah, well, of course. I think people need to know where you are so they can get access to you and learn from you. I think you're one of the most brilliant minds that I've ever met. You're always extremely gracious with your time, very kind every time you're on the show. And I learn something new every time. So it's kind of fun to have a guest on that isn't just saying the things I already know. And sometimes I have guests say things I already know because I'm talking to an audience who may not know those things yet, but it's exciting for me personally to learn new things as well. So I really appreciate that about you.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah. So maybe we could have you come on again. I don't know, maybe in another 6 months if you're up for that and keep going with all these questions, because I think, maybe we got to 3 or 4 and I think I had like 10 of them again. So, and I'm sure between now and then something will come up in training that I don't know. I don't know what's going on. I'll have to ask John how to deal with it.
As long as you're willing to continue to demonstrate your poor choice in guests, I will be happy to take advantage of it.
I don't think that's accurate, but anyway. All right, great. Well, thanks for coming on the show and I hope to see you again soon, John. Thank you again.
Sounds great. See you.